Thank you. Well, two things, well actually, to get started. One, I normally wear my collar, I'm like a real reverend. In getting here, I wanted to be here because when my dear friend, Senator Sheldon, hit me up, I want you to be here. I'm very busy actually with this issue, and so I said, there are very few people who can get me to make that move. So I actually was in Norfolk organizing around this. Norfolk was actually sinking and civil rights was happening. I'll get more into that, but I came in my rush of trying to do conference calls. I left my bag of my clothes in the Norfolk airport. No, it's okay though. Somebody now has a clergy collar in Norfolk. The fake reverend around Norfolk right now. So we're in Norfolk. Be careful, Norfolk. But I'm here, so that's the one thing. The second thing, this talk is, will come from the perspective of those who are in the movement, young people, and those who are first and worst will be impacted by the climate crisis. So I was a U.S. Air Force officer, and so one of the things they tell you in the Air Force is this thing about situational awareness. And so I also come from Georgetown. And so I'll do a Big East analogy. I know we're in the home of Providence. Maybe not Providence, I don't say anything. I don't know anything. Y'all were quiet. I should be a voice analogy. But I'll say this, my dear friend Gene Karpinski, who runs the League of Conservation Voters, we both go to Georgetown, I guess we're both Georgetown guys. And so in that, the analogy is this, that Providence is Big East, this is the game, and the Big East and the Providence shoots and makes the last second jumper. In the old days, you only had one perspective of that shot. Today, with technology and cameras now, if you see they can actually swing around the camera around. You can actually see, you can see Patrick Ewing now, who was a player now, a coach, him falling out because the Providence player scored the shot. You can see the guys on the bench all leaping up at one time. You can see the guy in the third row spilling his beer, around the corner because the shot was made. You can see everything happening in that perspective. And so what I want to give is the shot of the people kind of in the stands. This conversation happens from the coaches and the players and those who run the arena, but sometimes it doesn't happen from the people in the stands. And that's the perspective of this that I want to give. I want to give that perspective because I think it's those people who are the ones who are yelling and screaming the most for things to happen. And we're not listening to those screams. For many, as was kind of mentioned, this is, for young people in particular, for color, this is their lunch counter moment for the 21st century. That means, like in the 20th century, when we're fighting to have equality, this generation of young people is still fighting for equality. That's not a far-flung issue, but we have come a long way as black, white, brown, red, yellow, male, female, straight, gay, theists, atheists, humans, Americans. We've done, I love my country. You gotta understand, as a former Air Force officer, I actually really love my country. Obviously, I signed a document, give my life for the country, so I kind of love it a lot in that regard, but I definitely have not forgotten that. That's important to me because I look through the lens of that we can find solution, not through the lens of Republican or Democrat, but as solutionaries, as Americans who can find a solution. So this 360 viewpoint comes from the people in the communities and the young people who are calling for change. So I just want to make sure you understand where this comes from. And their idea that they are looking for a movement not just about equality, but about existence. So you've kind of heard a little bit about Greta. It's been amazing. She probably, I had no idea that there are people who are betting on the Nobel Peace Prize. You can bet on anything nowadays. There's actually people taking bookings on who's going to win that. I would think that would be the latest thing to bet on. I think there's so many things to bet on, but there are bookies over there in the UK who are taking wager bets. So she's the front runner if you're interested in that kind of thing. If you're a gambling person, and she's got close eyes on the win. This is no big surprise. But the message here is clear, and it has resonated with young people. That it's clear that I don't want you to have hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic because the house is on fire. That's the mentality, that not to just kind of act like it's the normal thing if you see a house on fire, but to really respond that you are hearing the screams, and you know that there's a baby in the house. You know grandma's in the den in the back, and you can see the flames. You wouldn't just go to Starbucks and buy another cup of coffee. You would respond differently. And that is what Greta and many young people, that is where they're coming from. Also, let me say this, I'm very honored to fall behind the commissioner. As someone who served in our government, I know how hard it is to serve in the government in any capacity. I will just make one recommendation, Senator, for you, that I think that maybe we can also change the name of FIRST. When I came to this, I will say I'm from Louisiana. I came through Hurricane Katrina, so I knew about FEMA a lot, but maybe we can change FERC to FRET, the Federal Renewable Energy Commission. And that might be a little change there that we can look at for a new model. So that's a gift to you. Free, there it is. But the great thing, though, is that these young people rallied, and it was unmistakable. Literally, between the past 2 Fridays, today is another Friday, that they're back out there again today. Greta's actually in Iowa, and literally millions across the globe organized, mobilized. I mean, there were young people who were in South Africa, Cape Town, young folks who were in Sweden, young folks who were right here in Providence, young folks in Washington, D.C., and New York. Literally 300,000 people in New York. There were literally millions of people throughout Germany. So clearly this is something that is a global component, where particularly mostly young people, and young people from all ilk, multicultural millennials, are coming together and realizing this is not only their issue, but they have to stand up. This is their lunch counter moment. This is their moment in which they realize that when they're in their 60s or their 70s, that if things aren't done now, we'll go from a climate crisis to this climate adaptation, in which we're just dealing with the crisis that we're dealing with. As before, I'm in Norfolk right now, working with communities. People say that Norfolk is the next New Orleans, which hurts me because I kind of went through Katrina. And so knowing with Katrina, where almost 1,900 people lost their lives, and then I know, still around Louisiana, that then people died and still die because of heartbreak and misery. So the numbers is countless. And then Maria and Dorian and Harvey, Superstorm Sandy. There's some young people are saying that this madness must stop, and we can change that. It's also important, Senator Sheldon said, which is very critical, is that dealing with the aspect of Citizens United. I mentioned the lunch counter a few times so far. I'm kind of glad that in those days, Woolworths couldn't put their thumb on the scale. If Woolworth, who had the lunch counter where people came to, which made that famous, I'm glad that Woolworth wasn't able to put their thumb on the scale so that we can keep a system where we have black people and brown people who were drinking out of the water fountains, and we had them also dealing with that. So I'm very glad that that didn't exist then, but unfortunately we have it now. And I'm also shocked, this full disclosure, that we have something called climate deniers. That to me is crazy. It would be the same equivalent of saying we have Jim Crow deniers. They just say it doesn't exist, so we believe it. No, there's no racism in the South. Of course not. It doesn't exist. What do you mean? There's different lunch counters. People go to the back of the bus. It doesn't exist. What do you mean? People have to different water fountains, have to go through their own hotels. It doesn't exist. That would be crazy if we allowed that to happen. So we allow for climate deniers, but we would never allow for Jim Crow deniers. It's the same madness, even worse, because we have the science to back up the climate. But we don't even have, we have this moral fiber, like the madness of Jim Crow. So, in that process, folks gathered all over this country. That's me actually at the Capitol. They only had a few adults who could speak at locations, so I was honored to be one of the speakers at the Capitol. But millions of individuals showed up. So the question is this: what are we willing to sacrifice to get to the solution that we know we need to get to? And I'm always asked this question because my dear friend Bill McKibben and others come to me and say, we're out here in the streets and we're doing some amazing things, but there's certain things that we must do as a movement and take some lessons from the civil rights movement, and also how we mend some of the things that we saw in that movement into our own movement. So first thing, let me say this. The reality of this great country of ours is that there are times when our country doesn't do right. And there are times when people have to speak up and put their bodies against the machine to grind it to a halt. I'm so grateful for the gay rights movement, the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement, and others, because our country would not be as amazing as it is right now if those amazing people would have been in Greenwich Village in New York, or the women in this world would say, you know what, this is ridiculous, we can't vote as women, or we still, unfortunately, we don't have equal pay in many cases. But it's still ridiculous, and people of color who realize that this will be a better place if we're all together. And so they took to the streets, obviously. They took to the streets realizing that this moral problem must change. And then from there, they did everything they could. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all. What our country went through wasn't a good time. But what we're doing now has to be the equivalent. And what I mean by that is that to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And we'll have the discussion. There are many ways that people are saying that we can do that. But there are some real clear transitional methods. But right now, it is ugly. It's ugly because in the Bahamas, literally, there are 600 people who we still can't find. Literally, in the aftermath of Harvey and now the current flooding in Houston, there are folks who don't have housing insurance, who have lost everything. There are folks who are still suffering. I can't tell you the suffering in Puerto Rico, post-Puerto Rico. So it's ugly. I don't want you to think of this climate crisis as some far-off thing. It is happening now, it is happening bad, and it is happening in a way in which we as humans either need to make that change to make things happen. Let me say this too, this is the one thing that's important. We ask me all the time, as a person of color, why are you interested in the kind of movement? I always wonder, because I kind of like clean air and clean water. I know I'm not sure of that. I mean, I kind of like it, I like that thing too, that's important. And so one of the things that's so important to me is that we've had a movement from Warren County in North Carolina, people fighting landfill, that this has been ongoing for many, many years. People of color have been at the forefront of that movement. We saw that recently in Standing Rock, in North Dakota, the indigenous community, fighting again, literally fighting for the clean water. Many were shown, for them was water is life. We see it in Flint. We see it all over this country where people are literally fighting for clean air and clean water. And they're linking things together. They're coming together, which is powerful. They're not holding back. They're saying the time of transition must happen now. The time for discourse has to stop. But this is the question that they're asking. They're saying, how can we fight poverty and pollution at the same time? That's the question. How can we as a movement, happening right here, Rhode Island, we're at the front lines. I mean, because of this, and also I got to say this, one of the great things, my son now was going to college in the New England area. He was actually going to college in Maine, but it's ice hockey. There you go. So you asked me about the black guy going to climate, there's also a black kid playing ice hockey. So that's a weird thing in our family, you know, whatever it happens. It kind of goes down. When he's up there, you know, 6'3", 240 pounds, you know, just, you know, black ice, just making it happen there, you know, doing this thing. So I'll be coming through New England a lot more to come see him and when they do their thing, play hockey. But the thing here is that you know, when you're a parent and a father, those things that take you off key, you just have a great speech and you come with your kid, you just forget everything else, which is the great thing about getting speech about your kids. But the one thing about that is that for them, poverty and pollution is the key thing as well. And so let me say this about that. Our movement, as it is right now, is a siloed, progressive climate movement. A siloed movement will not solve the climate crisis. A movement that puts things like immigration in one corner, women's rights in another box, Black Lives Matter in another box, issues regarding gentrification, health care. The one thing about climate, it impacts all of them. And the minute we begin to see this problem through the lens of that, then we will begin to move things forward. We break down those silos. That's important. And we must break them down in a way in which all of us can understand what's happening. This is me. I had a great time here. I had to testify before the Bureau of Land Management, which was great. So I had a joke to tell them, and I've been wanting to tell, and I'm going to tell you now, because it was fantastic. So coming from the Hip Hop Caucus, I can work with different groups. And so one of those going to work with is Black Lives Matter. And so working with Black Lives Matter, I was like, man, this is great. And so I've actually been in meetings where I've been with folks from Black Lives Matter, and I've been with environmental groups. And so I'll be in the meeting, I'll be like, man, we gotta get BLM together. And then the BLM and then the folks in the environmental side say, yeah, BLM, yeah, we gotta get the water and get the water runoffs, we gotta get this. And the folks in the black people side were like, oh yeah, I don't know what you mean by water, but yeah, we gotta get this together with criminal justice. And I was like, hold on, your BLM is what? Yeah, it's Black Lives Matter. And your BLM is what? It's Bureau of Land Management. Okay, well, let's just take a step back. Thinking of it, I tell actually the Bureau of Land Management in my testimony, you know what? I thought we were going to the Black Lives Matter meeting and ended up right here. That's true. So they were sitting there, you know, commissioners sitting there all day long, very, very stoic, looking like this. And so for the first time they laughed, like, ah, let's get the Black Lives Matter meeting. And so that was a great moment. But the key thing here is that young people in this movement are excited. And if we can somehow give them the keys. One of the things here that I'm actually the co-host, kind of just to add on, really, Smith, this is the Young People 0 Hour. They do a thing that we call the Big 1%, the coolest show on climate change. And they're being so creative about how to tell this climate story. And so they're doing those things in that aspect. And young people are now rising in the streets. I can't tell you how many young people I see every single day. I mean, I was with Varsity now on Sunrise. I remember with Hip Hop Caucus doing divestment, which they UMass Amherst. And so many other young people who I've seen come through the ranks are now doing amazing things. But they're so excited about what needs to be done. But there's another problem though. They're also scared. I've never seen so many young people. I've got so many phone calls of young folks who are committing suicide, of until they see the action. And I receive very young people who come to me and say, Rev, I don't want to have children. And they're like 15 and 16 years old, they're children themselves. Tell me, I don't want to have children because I know what this world is going to be like. That is not the kind of world that we should be creating. That is not the kind of place where young people, their future, take to the streets, give everything so that we as adults can do the right thing. So I have a few things. I'll give some suggestions and I'm done. Take a few questions. So one thing, I do believe that we need to have a clear, multicultural, multi-issue, grassroots-based, people of color-led climate movement. I do believe that. I think that's critical. I think it's important for us to begin to not just have a movement that is East Coast, West Coast, but a movement that is all of us, and that is a movement that is definitely has people of color at the center of it. I do believe that we must continue to have the demonstration we saw with the climate strikes. I think that's critical to show the breadth and just the width of this movement. I think people need to continue to see people in the streets. But I will say this, and I say to young people, demonstration without legislation leads to frustration. So if you're just doing the demonstration part, but you're not going to shape policy, then you're going to have a disconnect. You'll be so frustrated in your movement. So demonstration without legislation, and in some cases, demonstration without litigation leads to frustration. I'm so proud of the young people who are actually suing Juliana University grads regarding climate change. But we must connect those dots. But can we understand that either you shape policy or policy will shape you? And so that's very important for us to make sure that, yes, we must be in the streets, but we must also recognize the power of the streets. We must make sure those two things are connected, and not adversarial, but make sure they're connected together in that aspect. And I think that this is very important. You kind of heard from Commissioner earlier. Listen, I think that regardless of where we sit on the line, I think, listen, we have to have a massive turnout. I'm a big believer, as you've heard, in democracy. I love our political democracy. The fact that anybody can go into the ballot box. Now, it's going to be harder. We got to figure out some things that are making it hard for folks to vote. And there are folks from other countries. We're trying to get involved in our election. We got to make sure that the election is clean and fair. With that being said, we need to have a massive turnout. Because wherever you sit on the aisle, we need to have everybody's voice involved in this process. And I definitely think that to be women, people of color, and young people need to be making sure their voices are heard and make sure they are definitely speaking up at this critical moment in time. And I think come next, for the new Congress and the new president, I don't want to throw it in there, it's a personal thing, coming January 20th, 2021, we need to have you prepared for those first 100 days. We can't meet that process in a way in which we're coming to that moment unprepared. We have to be ready to move things forward in that aspect. There is a fighting chance of preventing full-out climate meltdown and leaving future generations with a world grounded in justice and love, and a world worth living and fighting for. As I close, I just want to say there are three things. I think this conference is very, very serious. I was very honored recently by the Bloomberg Foundation to be put as one of the speakers in their Beyond Carbon campaign. And they obviously I used to run away from the references of the similarities of me being a Southern preacher, and they were mentioned with Dr. King and all those kind of things. But I still believe in young people and solidarity and love. And so I close with this. 100 years from now, nobody in this room will be here. August 4th, 2119. None of them, including me, none of us will be here. And that's important, and that's sobering, but an important fact. But the reality is that what we actually do the same way that there were those who came before, and they stood up against slavery. So I now, as a black person, can stand before you here in Rhode Island with no fear or aggression or backlash, because they were proud white and black and other Americans who said that's wrong. 100 years from now, we won't be here, but we'll be here. They won't be talking about what Trump, or this, or that, in that regard. You know, that will have an impact. What will be here is that if we come together, as humans, and say that we are fighting the most important crisis of our time globally, that we're going to fight for a generation that we'll never see and never talk to. And they'll only know what's by our actions. They'll know, because we'll be long gone. They'll know that they have clean air, clean water, and they're not having wars and refugees. They'll know if we were successful. They'll also know if we fail. They'll know because it would be catastrophic. It's hard to think about that, but that's where we are. You are at the most critical moment that we have seen. I believe in humanity, I believe in people, and I believe that we fight for the next generation. Even when we're gone, they will say thank you for doing all you could do. Hallelujah.
Before we go to our quick break. Again, you are raising your hands. Our interns roaming with microphones are coming to you. And we have our first question right here in front.
Hi, my name is Susan Correlli, and I teach dance in Wells University, and also I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization called the Coalition Center for Environmental Sustainability. Thank you for very inspirational speech and presenting. But what you actually mentioned is very mirrors what I see in my classroom. And students, they are sensing something is going on. They want to get involved with the social change, and they'll look up to us, you know, getting some leadership, getting information to it. And what your record of having events happening and things happening, taking actions is very impressive. However, as you mentioned, all these people, like all of us here representing, we are doing our job in the silos. And then that is part of my nonprofit organization too. I'm trying to break these silos, making connections so we can make a collective shift toward whatever it is. So my question is that we have all this information, we know where we want to go, and we know what the gatekeepers. And then when we inspire these students, especially young people, do we have, in your experience, do we have some kind of a hub or a platform that these students, after they take actions, that something the platform that follows up their actions? Just like we have all these events going on, we have 50th year Earth Day events coming every planning, and all these nonprofit organizations, they come up with all these events for the same cause. Yet, all of them, as far as I observed, they all end as just events, just another event. There's nothing that actually repository or hub that actually follows through, that people can learn something from that effort. So I was wondering, from these young people, it's really inspirational, and it is really, as you said, it's very critical. And we can use this opportunity, climate crisis, as that, the problem-solving opportunity, solidarity that we all address. There's the civil rights movement, they come to poverty, this disparity here, as well as dealing with the global issues. So I was wondering if there is, or you are in any platform that you are aware of.
Thank you. So that's actually very layered, and thank you. The key thing is that we have to break the silos and create the platform that are needed for the next generation where they are fighting. I'll put on right now, I sit on a few big green organizations, board of directors, board of legal action, board of legal conservation voters, one of their board members. And so I'll say from this day, when I say that, and this is not private, I say this publicly, that we have to figure out a way to make sure that for young people, to create that platform, that we are passing on the infrastructure and resources for them to use, not creating a kiddie table where they're kind of coming in as part of Sierra Club or LCB or NRC or whatever the case may be, but literally we're having the faith to say that, listen, as it was Mr. Earth Day with Dennis Hayes and the first Earth Day, which will be 50 years next year, which actually was the emphasis of the new environmental movement post the Kite River and the small and everything else. So what we did for them, that we were creating these new organizations like Union Concerned Scientists and other things at that time, we need to be able to implant and create, let them have the resources in a way. And that's a philosophical question as well, because that's also dealing with funding and resources. But I do believe that that's important. And I do believe many of us who are also from agencies, there is an important need for us to, in other words, give young people the resources to let them do the creativity, the creative aspects of how they want to lead this movement. But with that being said, this goes back. The reason that we're in silos is not by accident. So I don't want you to think that we end up in this box, like we end up in different rooms. There are reasons why we end up in silos. There are reasons why we end up as, how we're partisan, depending on Republican and Democrat. We get on different sides of the aisle from that aspect. How we get in from a progressive standpoint, how we put immigration or women or healthcare, and we fight this issue. Even now, most of us in this room, maybe are sitting around the environment, and that's even siloing, even how we're looking at it. So I think that there is a need for us to begin to really address how we're creating these convenings so that other social conversations can be part of the conversation. So we're talking about, still rising, and I'm actually looking forward to that conversation, but also how it impacts education, how it impacts mental health, how it impacts healthcare, how it impacts, jobs and economy. We have to make sure that when we're having the conversation regarding the climate crisis, and we are making sure that every single issue that's impacted is not only talked about, but also in the room to find the solutions.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. Kurt Spalding is up in the front of the room, and the microphone's coming up right behind you.
Hi. So I've done a little work lately with the religious community on these issues. And I guess I'm going to make a very short question. How do you see faith and your role as a religious leader connecting to what you're doing? And how do we rally that part of our community to be even more forward? And they are forward, to be honest, depending on the different groups. But all those movements you talked about in the past have that piece, that sense of greater, higher purpose associated with faith. And I'm curious how you would respond to that. Age, well, even though you left your collars in.
I did. Pictures on the wall, though. I made sure. And it was a picture so you can at least see what it would look like if I had to, how it was back in Norfolk somewhere. Faith is a critical component. Obviously, our framers understood the difference of making sure that church and state is separate so that people can also the state can be protected, but also people who have their faith can be protected as well, to do their religion, and that's important. And I think that from a faith perspective, and I've had this religion in Norfolk and in the South, so it's different. This is, for people of color, they get it when they understand, when they see it, and that's encouraging. Actually doesn't bode well for many other folks, the kind of deniers, because people in the South and around are beginning to see this destruction of droughts and wildfires and the storms, and they're beginning to connect the dots. And that's been a huge impact in South Carolina, and also in Charleston, and throughout Florida, and then throughout that region, throughout Texas. People are beginning to understand the impacts, and they're beginning to utilize faith and they're called green faith. So that's actually a bustling coming. There is another side. There's a side, unfortunately, where there is a thin line between faith and foolishness. And so one of the things there is that there are some communities who, unfortunately, I think, I had to speak, this was a predominantly white evangelical community, they feel a certain way about their level of whiteness leaving in that aspect. So I think that they are not as willing to connect the dots, and so there's some inroad. That's discouraging. It's not unusual, because again, it's a rights movement as well in many cases. But it is discouraging that we aren't seeing the level of faith. I'm saying that, let me just say this though, the level what the Catholic Church is doing, obviously with the encyclical by the Pope, he put out a few years ago, was amazing. We're seeing across the board from many traditions, faith communities who are looking at this from the standpoint from the soul aspect to the clean air, clean water aspects. I think it's so encouraging. I think they're just getting their footing. There is a piece here, and I end with this. There's a piece where there are many in the faith community who somehow have been told that this is also a part of God's plan. That this is kind of what's happening now because of the sin that's being put out throughout this country. And we had that same thing that was told to some right that, if black folks marry white folks, that was the sin of the country. And so I think that we have to just kind of continue to rise. And I actually encourage my agnostic and atheist brothers and sisters to understand that faith is a key component in this conversation and not to write it off. I think that that's something that I've seen a lot of, and I would just hope that more of them would like this faith is nonsense and we don't want anything to do with that. I'm an atheist, I'm an agnostic, I don't subscribe to that, but I think it's critical that we understand that the more humanism we bring to this conversation, the more that we all can be having the same conversation. But faith is a critical component. So I think one of the solutions to us even coming together and moving things forward. Thank you all so much.
Your stretch break. That was it. Thank you. We're going to make up a little bit of time and keep going. One thing I want to call your attention